Recording started.
Good morning and welcome to the New York State Council on the Arts Museum Program General Operating Support webinar. Before we get started, a couple points. You all should be muted upon entry. I will encourage you to send any communication through the chat box, which you should find in your upper right-hand corner. If you're seeing any kind of ghosting on the right-hand side, that's our chat box on the bottom right that may be ghosting. Send questions at any point. At the end of the presentation, those questions will be announced and answered anonymously, so you should feel comfortable asking any question you want. We will not identify who you are. So again, welcome to the Museum Program General Operating Support webinar.
I'm Fabiana Chiu-Rinaldi. I'm the Arts Program Officer for the Museum Program and the Electronic Media and Film Program.
And I'm Kristin, Herron, Arts Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums, which is where we're focusing today. So first of all, since I'm hosting a number of webinars, I want to make sure that you are in the right one. Today's webinar focuses on museums that intend to submit an application for unrestricted general operating support through the Museum Program at the New York State Council on the Arts for the fiscal year 2017 funding cycle, which will be reflecting a contract of January to December 2017 for that first year. If your organization is already receiving general operating support through an active multi-year grant, then this seminar is not for you. You will have to register that grant, but you will not have to submit a new application. Today is about those organizations submitting new applications. And please be aware that any organization applying for or receiving general operating support may not apply for project support in the museum program. It's either general operating support or project support in museums. You still may not be sure if your organization is already receiving general operating support, so I want to review how you know this. And there are at least 3 different ways to check. The first one is to go back to your original contract with NYSCA, which should have laid out the terms of your agreement and the number of years that that contract was including. Barring that, you can log on to NYSCA's website at arts.ny.gov with your login and password and review what we call your NYSCA portfolio. If your funding for fiscal year 2016 shows up as 2 of 2, 3 of 3, 4 of 4, or 5 of 5, then your contract has concluded and you should apply for 2017. If you are still unsure, after this webinar is over, you should feel free to call or email Kristin, myself, or Fabiana, and we can help you ascertain whether your organization is on multi-year or not.
Now, you may not realize that the New York State Council on the Arts was established in 1960. In 1966, the museum program was officially started, and so we're celebrating, believe it or not, our 50th year. Of course, this is well before any of us were born, right? But anyway, NYSCA, as you may know, NYSCA provides competitive grants across 16 programs, and applicants to the museum program may apply in other programs. We have listed for you the other programs in which you can apply. And last year, fiscal year 2016, the total funding for the agency was $40 million in grants. Of course, for the 16 programs, that's not nearly enough, but that's for a different call, and that's probably for the advocacy call.
So the museum program, I wanted to start with kind of our own internal mission or call. So museums allow us to experience great art, to discover stories about objects, and to explore worlds both new and familiar. Within museums, arts and cultural activities may be very diverse, but at their heart is an emphasis on the exhibition and interpretation of art, objects, or an historic space. So we want to go over some program prerequisites, what we're calling the basics. And the basics start with what is a museum? Which is something we could discuss all day long, but this is how we are defining a museum for the purposes of applying to the New York State Council on the Arts. It's an organization that exists for educational and aesthetic purposes. It owns and cares for or uses and interprets objects and or a site for the public presentation of regularly scheduled programming and exhibitions. So we acknowledge that there are some institutions that don't have a permanent collection, but they are still interpreting objects and art in a way consistent with how museums function. Museums follow accepted professional standards, such as those developed by the American Alliance of Museums. And in New York State, most museums must be chartered through the New York State Museum Chartering Program. That's through the State Education Department. I use the word most because some institutions predate that system. If you're not sure if you are properly chartered, you can always ask us questions about that later. For NYSCA application purposes, when we use the word museum, we are including historic houses and historic sites with that term, but we are not generally including organizations that primarily manage living collections. Those organizations should consult New York State Zoos, Botanical Gardens, and Aquariums program, popularly known as ZBGA, which spun off of NYSCA many, many years ago, and it is through that funding source that those entities can seek that unrestricted support.
Another way to establish eligibility is to be open for a certain number of days a year. So how long, how often do you have to be open to be eligible? Museums must have been open to the public for a minimum of 1 year prior to the application deadline. Museums should provide significant ongoing services to the public. The strongest applicants provide programming for a minimum of 120 days per year. Some have been around for 120 years, yes, but a minimum of 120 days per year by the deadline, and organizations open to the public by appointment only do not meet this requirement. Obviously, you're applying for public funding. The longer, the better case you make for public funding.
Before I address the question on the screen, I want to point something out that Fabiana and I are not actually discussing in this meeting, but is critical to any application. In New York State now, any organization that wishes to seek support from the state must be pre-qualified through New York State's Grants Gateway. This webinar is not going through the process of becoming pre-qualified. It is also not going through the step-by-step process to use the Grants Gateway. NYSCA will be providing a manual like it did in the past and some, I believe, YouTube videos to help use that system. Those will be going up on our website relatively soon, but I do want to caution you all, if any of you out there intending to apply, if your museum is not currently pre-qualified in the Grants Gateway, that needs to happen as soon as possible. If you are in this audience and you don't know what I'm talking about when I say pre-qualified, as soon as we finish this webinar, go to grantsreform.ny.gov and follow the steps there. It's a two-step process to first submit some information and get a username password for the website, and then you have to go on and upload a number of organizational documents, including your audit, your CHAR 500 or charities registration information, your 990. It's a number of documents that must be uploaded and then evaluated on our end, and that you need to get done quickly. So back to the show. How do I know if my museum is GOS ready? The language we use for general operating support is pretty much the same throughout the agency. So GOS, general operating support, rewards exemplary practice in all areas of administration, finance, programming, and other organizational activities. To determine if your organization is a good candidate for GOS, we will analyze the entirety of your museum's operations and programs through the application that's provided. A competitive GOS applicant has a clear mission, has ongoing programs and exhibitions which support that mission, cares for its collections, maintains fiscal stability, must employ at least one salaried full or part-time staff member. I'm going to say that again, one salaried full or part-time staff member for the small organizations out there, can't be contractual. You must have an engaged, an active board, and fairly pay any artists or consultants that you work with.
And you should know that these are the minimal requirements or expectations of general operating support. Obviously, when we look at all areas of operation, everything is talked about in the proposal. If there are areas, what we usually tell our applicants is that if there are areas of operation that still need significant strengthening, that there are areas that are weak, that need to be addressed, those things usually do come up in the proposal, and if you're going to put a significant amount of effort in your general operating proposal or in any of your proposals, it's important that you put in for what it is that is the best category for you. So obviously, if there are areas of operation, it might be wiser to look at the project category, which we will talk about later on today. Areas that need strengthening, so in the project support category. Either way, you can talk to us at any point, and we can help assess what may be the better option for you. You're going to put a lot of effort into this proposal, so we would like to make sure that that you're able to put your best foot forward here.
And I always will tell folks who call, you know, we have about at least 60 people in this audience. So I know some of you have applied before, some of you are new. There's a mix of folks out there. So if you're one of those organizations trying to decide whether to go for GOS, as Fabiana said, you know, thinking about the strengths of your organization, I always send you back to our guidelines, which are live right now, the guidelines for fiscal year 2017. Are available on our website at arts.ny.gov by clicking on guidelines, then museum, then general operating support. Look at the questions that you're going to have to answer and be as self-critical as you possibly can be. Be honest with yourself and ask yourself whether you would be able to answer these in a strong fashion. I see that questions are coming in, which is fantastic. We're going to save questions till the end, so don't worry, we will get to your questions. Of course, everyone wants to know how much they can ask for when they submit a general operating support request. And this is always a tough thing to answer. The museum program has around $3.5 million to distribute throughout the state through all of its categories. And that may seem like a lot of money, but it really isn't, because there are so many museums in New York State that are eligible to apply, and we're happy to have them apply. So, based on recent funding, the awards for general operating support in the museum program have ranged from $5,000 to about $117,000 as the highest award. These dollar amounts reflect a range of far less than 1% of a very large museum's operating budget and up to maybe 9% of a small museum's budget. You'll see in the guidelines that it will say we can fund up to 25% of your museum's operating budget. It doesn't happen. The budget is not there for that. That's a council-wide policy. It just doesn't happen in this program. General operating support is awarded on a multi-year basis, and I should note that museum service organizations may be closer to that 25% if their application is evaluated in a very positive way, and the idea is that they are serving so many other institutions. That's why their award may be higher, because it reaches so many other organizations and so many people throughout the state. The determination of this is related both on the evaluative process that we're going to discuss later, the amount of money that's in the budget, and the size of your institution. So your institution's operating budget is what is used to determine funding awards. It's kind of a sliding scale. Again, the larger the institution, the smaller the percentage. It's a way, there's no way to create a clear, logical assignment of dollar amounts that the New York State Comptroller's Office can understand in a program when there are institutions with operating budgets under $100,000 and operating budgets over $200 million. So this is a process, this is a metric I use that the Comptroller's Office has understood, and that's essentially, again, percentage based on size, based on rating. There's a really important note about the funding component. NYSCA does not guarantee support from a preceding year. So if you have received general operating support, you are applying again. There is no promise that you're going to be successful this year. It's based on the application you submit and the supporting documents you provide. And what's also a hard thing, I think, to wrap one's head around is that past grant funding amounts are not indicative of future funding levels. What does that mean? That means your museum, you know what you received if you received GOS before. And of course you want more money, because who doesn't? And you're going to make that case. You're going to argue in your application why your organization deserves more money, because that's what you should be doing. Absolutely understood. You may, at the end of this process in the fall, hear from Fabiana or I, congratulations, you've been funded, and the dollar amount is not more than you received in the past. And you may be very disheartened or very sad about this. And it is not, this does not necessarily mean you've done something wrong. It means based on the amount of money that the program has to give out, based on the number of applications that were submitted, based on the number of applications that were fundable, the money has to be divided up. So as an example, last year, Fabiana and I were very surprised to see a 25% increase in general operating support of organizations who had not applied before. That did not mean that all of them were supported, but some of them were, and that was a new pressure on the budget, which meant the highest award given out was not the highest amount it had been in the recent past. That all may be very complicated. I hope it's not terribly confusing. Definitely feel free to ask questions through the chat function or later to us about the determination of funding. It is unfortunately not a very simple process where you're applying for a very specific dollar amount.
But if there's one thing that we do strive for is in any given year is to be fair and equitable to those who apply. We, in fiscal year 2017, we do expect a record number of general operating support requests, more than last year, more than the year before. So buckle up. So how do we decide who gets funded? NYSCA's review process is well respected in the field and has been around for as many years as the museum program has been around, probably. Once an application is submitted, it is first reviewed by the staff to assure that it meets the basic eligibility requirements, and the staff, that would be Kristin or I, then reads and analyzes each eligible application. We then turn to the peer review panels. These panels are comprised of museum professionals from across the state. They represent museums from upstate, downstate, central New York, small, medium, large museums, all areas of expertise from education to curatorial to administration, you name it. The panelists then meet at the New York State Council on the Arts offices to evaluate each one of the requests. And the grant requests are evaluated based on 3 basic criteria. The first one being artistic and programmatic quality, the second one being managerial fiscal competence, and the third one being service to the public. Each application is then rated on a scale 1 to 9 for each of these criteria and receives an aggregate score in the end. Based on the panelists' recommendations and the amount of funding available, as Kristin said, the GOS awards are then determined. The funding recommendations are then forwarded to a subcommittee of our council, which is like our board of directors. They have more discussion about each one of the recommendations, and then their recommendations are then forwarded to our full council. The council members are appointed by the governor.
And I just want to comment quickly on that 1 to 9 scale. I instruct the panel in every program I run to use that scale widely. We receive 2 to 3 times the dollar amount of requests that we have to give out, so tough decisions have to be made. So I urge them to use that scale, that full scale. I also always instruct the panel that to me a 9 should be a rarity. A 9 should demonstrate an exemplary institution, an exemplary project that's a national or international model. I can say that since we instituted this scoring system 5-6 years ago, we have never in the museum program, any of my programs, had an organization receive the score of 9. I consider that a very good thing. You all may question me on that, but what I mean is that means the panel is doing their job. They're being critical, they're being thorough, they're being thoughtful, they're really spending time looking at your application and using their collective expertise to provide that assessment that we need them to do.
But it doesn't mean that you get less money. No. The top score gets the most money, no matter what.
Yes.
Whether it reaches 9 or not, top score is top score. Yes?
Absolutely.
Kristin, this is a good time to talk about the panel comments.
We can, Fabiana.
Okay.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we do during the review process is when the panel, the peer panel meets here at NYSCA, the staff takes comments from the panel, writes them down. They're not part of the public record, but we definitely keep notes on how the proposal is being reviewed. So this is used as feedback. It's very useful for applicants. If for any reason they get less than what they had expected, or if they get no funding, they can definitely call us after the decision has been rendered to find out what the feedback was. And the feedback has oftentimes proved very useful in crafting the following year's proposals.
Absolutely. And even if you have been happy with your past success, you should still call and get your panel comments. The panel often will give some constructive criticism, no matter how strong your project is. And nevertheless, it's always good to hear what they saw as being particularly strong. So regardless of the results, we encourage you to reach out to hear past panel comments. You can do that best by emailing us to schedule time to talk. So let's get to the heart of the matter, the application narrative, or what we like to call what we want to know about your museum. The next few slides are going to walk you through that application narrative guidelines, which again are up right now on arts.ny.gov under the application guidelines, museum program, and GOS. And although I said I was going to wait to answer questions at the end, there's a good one I see out of the corner of my eye. The application deadline has not yet been announced for the New York State Council on the Arts. All of the deadlines at NYSCA will be the same. The e-blast that went out saying the guidelines were up did mention that the deadline wasn't yet announced. The anticipation is the following. We anticipate that the application will go live around February 22nd, and that the deadline is going to be either the very end of March or very early in April. Program staff are certainly hopeful that the firm answers to that question will be announced soon, but I am allowed to tell you that much, so get ready. Buckle up, as Fabiana said earlier, it's about to happen. But there will definitely be an e-blast, and it will be on our website when the actual dates of both the opening of the application and the closing of the application are live.
But the good news is that the questions are up, the guidelines are up, so you can start looking at the questions. We're about to go over those. You can start looking at the questions and divvy those up within your staff so that you can have some ready answers that you can plug into the proposal once it opens.
And it's my understanding that because this is going through the grants gateway, we typically have allowed only 2,000 characters per answer, but the gateway won't let us do that. So I believe, I'm 95% certain you're going to have 4,000 characters for each question. And Fabiana and I would like you to think about whether you really need to use the full 4,000 characters for every question. Try to be judicious about that. You don't want to tire everyone out with a lot of text where it's not needed. Some questions are going to need it, some questions you won't. So that's just to give you a heads up. Characters, by the way, include spaces, include punctuation. So make sure you do your character count when you're working on a Word document. So to the slide in front of us, we're going to go through that narrative. We're going to take you through each section. It is arranged by the primary NYSCA criteria. So I'm going to tackle artistic programmatic. There are 6 questions in this section that you have to answer. You're going to have to provide a history of your museum. You'll need to include links to your website and any social media platforms you use. This is how we're going to get visual images of your institution and your programs. This is our source because this is what the public can see. And I want to point out that if you're going to list social media, make sure you're active on that social media. If you you have a Facebook page and you haven't posted anything in a year, that does you more of a disservice, I would almost say, that letting us know you have it, but you haven't done anything on it is not a good thing. So if you're not active in social media, then you should identify that. You're also going to summarize your programs and exhibition schedule for the upcoming years. That's probably going to need your full 4,000 characters. And provide details on collections management if you own a collection. If you don't own a collection, you can address that in this question as well, but talk about how you incorporate objects in your programming. This is the section where we're going to highlight more than one of the questions that sometimes trip people up. So this is where we want to give you some insider's info on how to answer questions. I'm going to start with question number 2, which is to articulate the organization's artistic and or cultural vision, where you see yourself in the realm of the arts and culture. I find that art museums don't tend to have a problem with this, but sometimes historic sites, historic houses, science museums sometimes do. So for all of you, remember you are applying to the New York State Council on the Arts. Our mission is to support arts and cultural activities. I always say that if I was writing the application, I could make the case that my institution has a cultural or artistic vision no matter what type of museum I am. And for us, a lot of that boils down to the fact that you are ideally, and you should be, interpreting objects and art throughout your programs. So regardless of the type of institution you are, artifacts or art are at the core of who you are, or a structure, are at the core of who you are and should inform that artistic cultural vision. If you answer this question by saying we do not have an artistic or cultural vision, if that's how you're going to answer it, I highly discourage you from applying for general operating support. Answering this question by saying you don't have an artistic or cultural vision is going to cause so many negative ripples in the assessment, you are probably not going to fare well. The other thing you should not do for this or any question is to not actually answer what we're asking for. It happens a lot on number 2 where people aren't sure what to put, so they just talk about themselves, but they don't ever address that critical thing they have to think about as to their institutional vision and how it ties into the arts and culture. So that one may take a little time for some of you to ponder. Definitely take the time to work it through. Evaluation is question number 5, and we want to know about how your museum evaluates this program and providing an example of how evaluation has led to improving your program, your exhibitions, even perhaps your visitor services side. What is important here is to let you know that very, very few institutions answer this question well. It's something that's really important. We understand that really qualitative evaluation can cost a lot of money, and we're not suggesting that that's what you have to do. But if your evaluation is simply numerical, if it's simply quantitative, well, we had we had X number of people attend our program, so that made it good. Or any other, just simply have a guest book. You have a guest book. Thank you, Fabiana. That's another one. We have a guest book, people sign it. That's not a strong enough evaluation. We want to see something more. I remember an application that talked about how the numbers they had for a program and the fact that their speaker was supposed to speak for an hour and spoke for 2 hours. And they got a lot of, not formalized, but they got a lot of feedback that night, verbally. It wasn't a formal evaluation, but they were able to articulate something very simple to say they've got to be more on top of and mindful about keeping their speaker to the time frame, or perhaps vetting speakers to know who can be focused. So that was an example where it wasn't a formalized evaluation program. They didn't have a consultant. It wasn't just numbers. They could tell us the number. They could say, although it was, again, not a formal evaluation process, they could talk about the responses and then immediately what they did to change things. So think about how your institution can reflect that. And that leads me to number 6, changes and challenges. All right, I said before, with artistic cultural vision, that saying you're not answering it will be a problem. Here's another one. Please, no one should answer changes and challenges as not applicable. No one should leave it blank. I believe firmly that every museum has a change or a challenge facing it. If you believe that your institution is perfect, everything's great, there's nothing you could improve on, that signals to me that there are really deep-rooted issues in your institution. I'm pretty upfront about that. Makes me dig deeper to find out what's going on, because we all in our lives can improve on something. So it may not be a giant thing. You may not have a terrible deficit that you're struggling with, or a failing infrastructure, or your director just left and you're not sure what to do. It may not be anything big. It may be something smaller, but think about changes in your institution, new staff, challenges, any of the examples I gave. Talk about that and talk about how you will address it. I think what's hard for institutions with this question is they don't want to show the warts of their institution to a funder. We're telling you we want to see that because we want to see how you address it. I'm going to give another example which does not name an institution. A few years ago, we had an institution who was having some real fiscal difficulties. And if you're having some serious deficits, that you're not able to address, that's a question Fabiana is going to talk about later about applying for GOS. But in this case, this institution addressed both in the finance section and in the changes challenges the reality of their financial situation and very detailed explanation of how they were going to turn themselves around, which years later they did, which was great. But because they were very honest and about what was going on and very honest about the range of approaches they were going to take to address this, the panel saw this very positively. So changes and challenges is a great opportunity question for you to talk about how you really think about your institution, how you always want to improve, and how you're going to tackle that moving forward. It's probably one of my favorite questions, actually, to read because I think it's so telling about what an institution is really about and where they're going.
Wait, but my favorite question is coming up.
Oh my gosh. And the truth is, I should say, the bad choice of words. It doesn't matter what my favorite question is, because that doesn't decide whether you get funding or not. I was really trying to stress, I see people say not applicable here.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
The questions are designed to give you an opportunity to tell us about your thought process, about how your organization operates, how, what is its philosophy towards solving problems. And so we really want to see that. It really is an opportunity. Don't let it slip away.
That's great.
So as we said earlier, there are 3 categories or 3 criteria that we evaluate for each one of the applications. The first one being the artistic. The second one is managerial fiscal. And again, we're looking at all areas of your operation. This is where we're digging deep here. There are 6 questions in this section. You will see the questions when you go to our guidelines on our website. They address staffing, governance, facilities, institutional and succession planning, finances, fees for artists and consultants. I know there's a question about that. We'll address that later. If your organization has a long-range or strategic plan, you're encouraged to tell us what's in it. You're also encouraged to submit it as a support material. And if you don't have one, this is an opportunity, too, for you to tell us why you don't have one. Is this the wrong time to plan? I suppose that in any organization, there's the right time and the wrong time. There's readiness issues. And so, but tell us why you don't have one. If you have one, but it's outdated, tell us why it's outdated and what you're thinking about doing in the future to update it. I think the most important question in this section is finances. This is where we want you to, in writing, in words, detail plans for meeting current and future expenses, include the sources of earned and unearned income, and explain any current and or recurring surplus or deficit. I can't underscore this enough. explain why you have a surplus or a deficit. Here's the interesting thing. You're going to be submitting an organizational budget. We look at the organizational budget. The panel looks at the organizational budget. If your organizational budget is showing a deficit, and that's okay for many organizations, it happens, tell us in the narrative part of the application what that deficit is. Is it real? Is it not? Is it something that you're fixing? Is it something that your board is aware of? What are the plans for meeting the challenges of that deficit, for retiring the deficit? If you have a surplus, tell us why that happened and whether that's going to continue to happen. And are you adjusting your budget because of that? So definitely an opportunity for you to tell us whether there's a deficit and why that and how you're dealing with it. If you, in your narrative, tell us that there's a deficit and we look at your budget and we don't see the deficit, that's a red flag too. It means left hand. It happens. It means left hand doesn't know what right hand is doing. Make sure your numbers match your words and vice versa.
Excellent. All right, the third criteria is the service to the public. There are 4 questions in this section. You're going to be asked to define your audience, to discuss your marketing efforts, including those online, and to discuss audience development.
And here's on to what we think is probably the most important question in this section. Question number 16, community context. This question and the answers you put in there are extremely helpful in helping us determine how successful you deal with it. You identify the other organizations in your area that provide similar arts or cultural activities, and you tell us how their activities support, enhance, or differ from those of your organization. This is where this is an opportunity for you to describe any partnerships, any collaborations with other organizations. No arts or cultural organizations should be acting in isolation of what happens in their community. And this is a chance for you to tell us how you don't do that. If you're working in isolation and not taking into account the resources available to you in your community, then there's a red flag, and not really sure you should be applying for general operating support. So this is, again, tell us about who you're working with and how it is that what you're doing is not a duplication of services. Again, it's public funds.
Great. And after you spend all that time writing, you come up to the last question, which is support materials. We ask you to submit the required support materials and list them in question number 17. You may all wonder why we make you do this. It's a double check for us and for you. We want to make sure that you know there are supporting documents required. We want to make sure you know what they are. And by listing them, we know that you've read the guidelines, or we believe you've read the guidelines, or not read the guidelines. I've seen supporting documents listed that are not the ones we asked for. So you have to read the guidelines. It also is a way for us to double check when we're looking in the grants gateway to see what's been submitted, to say, well, you think you've uploaded this, did you upload it? So for general operating support, we've tried to simplify matters. We want, as a supporting document, resumes or biographical statements of up to 3 staff, no more than 1 page each. Make sure if you're doing biographical statements that whatever is there is relevant to that person's position in your institution. They may have a very lengthy CV, but if you summarize it in a way that doesn't make sense for why they're your director or curator or educator, you should think about that. We want your organizational chart, whether you're large or small. If you're small, there's some easy templates online to show us what that is. And if you have a long-range or strategic plan, you're not required to submit it, but we encourage you to submit it as part of your application. You're noticing that there's nothing about visuals here. Again, we're going to your website and we're going to social media to get a sense of your institution and get a visual idea of your museum and what you do. So if your website or your social media doesn't include, for example, an image of the exterior of your structure, doesn't include current programs or exhibits, you might want to take this time to update your website, because we're going to see those and we're going to look for those. Finally, we're going to take a little break from just talking to you and take some time to answer your questions. I know that we have some already. I want to remind you the way to ask us questions is to use the chat function. So it should be on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. It says chat. Just type it in there. I've set it up so the questions come privately to us. I am not going to say your name or your institution, nor will Fabiana, so you can feel free to ask anything that you want to ask. If you ask a question that we somehow think is going to identify you, we'll tackle that privately. So let me go over these questions and just keep typing them in. So do you want to?
Sure. So a caller wants to know how fair payment of artists is determined. Is there a scale? NYSCA does not have a scale, and it depends per community. So you may want to check with other arts or cultural organizations in your region what it is that they pay artists.
You could check your local arts councils. Mm-hmm. This is also, I'll give an example again, not naming an institution. We saw an application come in where there were going to be visual artists and performing artists involved. And the visual artists were not getting paid, but the performing artists were. There's an example of unfair payment where one was not getting anything at all. So we want to see the case you make, and folks in the city are likely to have a higher rate than those in more rural parts of the state. If you want to talk to us privately about this, we can, but we just want to, NYSCA believes in paying artists. We want to make sure that they are being supported as well for what they do. So we don't want to see you give a lecturer hundreds of dollars to speak and an artist doing a program getting nothing. So that's part of that answer. We answered the question about the deadline. If anybody came in late, the deadline has not yet been announced. It will be announced soon. It will most likely be late March or early April, and we expect the application to go live around February 22nd.
Can I say something else about the artist program?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
So it is the New York State Council on the Arts, right? So I'm going to put my activist hat on a little bit. If any agency should be interested in making sure that artists make a living wage in their communities and are appreciated for their work and are not asked to always volunteer their services, that would be the New York State Council on the Arts. So artists are workers in our communities. They have families, they have bills to pay, so we want to make sure that we treat them right.
You know, you could substitute museum employee into everything you just said too, so I'm just thinking, we weren't talking about this, but you know, part of the assessment is seeing that the employees of your institution also get a living wage, so bear that in mind when you're thinking about applying for GOS. We do look at the salary levels, and we recognize that they're different in different parts of the state.
And that includes the callers.
Yes, that's what
yes.
Wage. That's
Treat yourself right.
All right, next question. Oh, this is good. Assuming a multi-year grant request, and I'm going to pause there before I finish the question. When you apply for general operating support, we assume that you want to receive more than 1 year of support. The panel may determine whether you receive 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5-year multi-year. It depends on your rating. The higher the rating, the more multi-years they're comfortable giving. It's fairly rare that we only do a single year of support, but it has happened if there are some issues facing the institution. Sometimes 2 years is given because maybe there's a new director and they want you to come back sooner rather than later, so that person's vision and leadership is able to really take hold. There's a number of reasons for the years you'll receive. You don't directly ask for it. We just assume when you apply for GOS, you're asking for a multi-year grant. So the question is really, how much detail should be provided on exhibitions beyond year 1? That's a great question. You have, again, approximately 4,000 characters for that question. That's a question I expect might be filled out close to that 4,000. We would like to know as much as we can about your exhibition schedule, at least for the first 2 years. I don't know if you can, depending on how many exhibitions your institution does, you might be able to go out to 3 years. What would be more valuable to us, instead of just listing titles for 3 years, would be if your space doesn't allow it to list titles of exhibitions, say, for 2 years, and a little bit of explanation. So I don't just want to see the title of the exhibition, the artist's name. I want a phrase or a sentence, if space allows, what's the thesis? It's a retrospective of X artist, or the exhibition title and what's the premise behind the exhibition. So the panel wants a little bit more than just title.
Yeah, and the panel wants a little bit more than lists. The interesting thing is that what are we getting at when we see your list of exhibitions for the first year, second year, or possibly third year, if you have it? We're looking at your thought process. We're looking at curatorially where you're going. What are the things that your organization is concerned about and wants to push forward in terms of new scholarship? So we want to see that behind the scenes thinking, strategic thinking about what exhibitions you're putting forward. So that's really what you're telling us. So let's just pretend that for year 3 you do not have titles, but you have a direction. You know that there's a celebration of women's rights going on in your community, and that's what you want your exhibitions to focus. Well, tell us about that. Tell us that on year 3 you don't yet have the titles, but that you're working with A, B, and C consultants to work on an exhibition schedule that deals with this particular issue.
But the next year, the 2017, you better know what your exhibitions are. If you don't know what they are, think twice about applying for general operating support. So you should have 2017 planned out. Fabiana is absolutely right about further out. Right. So here's a question. I'm not going to be able to give you the actual answer you want, but if we submitted a grants gateway update in mid-December and we are still awaiting our pre-qualification approval, when do you think that may happen? So Fabiana and I are not involved in the pre-qualification steps. I can't even, help you and go in and do it myself because I don't have access. I'm sorry that you have submitted your documentation that long ago and you have not heard a response. I wrote down which institution this is, and I'm going to see if I can find out after the call what's going on.
That's definitely a grants gateway issue.
And well, that's a NYSCA staff issue of operations. But
I'll be honest. But they deal with grants gateway.
Yeah.
And what usually happens with Grants Gateway is there's a lot of back and forth. You submit materials, they're reviewing them, then they push it back to you, and they say, well, you didn't submit the right one, send us the right one, et cetera. It's quite a dance.
Well, what's a good point there from Fabiana to this applicant or anyone else, I don't know what your vault says. If your vault says in review, then yes, you are waiting for someone to look at it. If your vault says modifications, that means it's been sent back to you with a note because there's something, as Fabiana said, you need to update. So I don't know what your situation is. If it's modifications, it means the ball is back in your court. If it's in review, it's still awaiting review at NYSCA.
So make sure you take a look.
Yeah, definitely. Another question, are we allowed to submit a link that demonstrates our past artistic projects? For example, as a science center, our artistic programs rotate in and out and aren't always active at a specific time. So there's a couple questions for me here, and Fabiana, I'll let you ponder too how you might respond. So is there a link to demonstrate past projects? Yes, sure, you can do that in the question where we ask for URLs and social media. But what I want to caution here is if you're a science center and you're applying to the New York State Council on the Arts, general operating support, and you're going to discuss programs that are primarily STEM-based, not incorporating STEAM, not incorporating the arts all the time, there's the question as to whether GOS is the right spot for your organization or whether you should be coming to project support for a program that incorporates art and science. Again, I go back to, I can sort of make that case for almost any institution. So if you're a science museum, how is what you do related to interpreting objects in your museum? If you're very solidly about chemistry or engineering or physics, those are great things, but we're not the National Science Foundation, we're the New York State Council on the Arts, and so it's going to depend on how your institution comes across. If you apply for GOS and you talk mostly about very straight science programming, you will not likely fare well in this process. Do you have?
Yeah, I think if your arts and culture mission is very clear within the other larger mission, then definitely put it forward. But if it's something that you really have to fish out and prove to us, then that might be a little bit of a harder sell.
And feel free, this applicant or any applicant, to reach out to one of us to talk about your institution specifically.
In general, what I usually say is the more you have to contort to fit our guidelines, the more that's an indication that it's just not the right fit.
Absolutely.
So talk to us about what the right fit might be, and we might be able to find a better fit within our guidelines.
That's a great point. Our next question is, I recall a question about number of youth benefiting in the past. Number one, will this question be a part of this year's application as well? Yes, I assume it is. We have a number, when you go online, this is probably on the NYSCA website because unfortunately you're going to have to use both the NYSCA website and the Grants Gateway. Sorry, the Gateway is not built to capture everything we need. The question about youth benefiting is not impacting necessarily your application review. It is part of the statistics we must capture to report back to the National Endowment of the Arts, which provides NYSCA with about $700,000 to $800,000, which we re-grant to arts groups throughout the state. So the NEA requires us to report back. So when you have to do things like the drop-down boxes saying what your primary field is, for example, that's not something we look at in evaluation. That's something that is captured not specifically about your institution, but overall to report back to the NEA. And then the second question this applicant had was, how does NYSCA define youth, which is to me anyone under the age of 18.
That's
and K through 12.
Right.
K through 12.
Also, I'm just reading into this. The applicant says this question has been asked in the past. If you have answered this question in the past, then be consistent.
Oh, absolutely.
And moving forward, you've obviously figured out how to answer it and be consistent, because if in 1 year you said we serve 2 youth and then and this year you decide to report 20,000, there's a story behind that. And we would like to know what that story is. But the other thing is that in some sections of the NYSCA website, where you are asked to input numbers or data, sometimes there are what we call help bubbles. And you should hover over the question and see if there is a little bit more of an explanation as to what NYSCA wanted as an answer.
So we are still accepting questions. If anyone's not sure how to do that, it's top right-hand corner chat box. You type in a question. We will answer it without identifying who you are. A couple questions we still have. And I don't know if, Fabiana, you want to address this. Will my museum get the amount we ask for? You want me to take that one?
I can give it a try. Will your museum get the amount that you ask for? Sometimes. It depends. It depends on whether you've asked, whether you're highly rated by you receive a high score, and you happen to have requested something that is within what we can give out in terms of our budget. If you ever receive a dollar amount that is close to what you have requested, then that means that your proposal did very, very well, and that the panel really wanted to reward you and not nickel and dime you. However, if you happen to make a request that is 10 times what you've received in the past, and you do not show in your proposal how your activities are 10 times bigger or more vigorous than in previous years, then the panel is going to have a hard time going there. We do encourage our applicants to ask for, if you can prove that you have a higher capacity and have increased your activity, to ask for more than what you have received in the past, so that you can give us the chance to reward you if, in fact, the panel agrees with you.
That's good. And I should just say that we can't give you more than you asked for. If you request 10,000, but the panel really wanted to give you 15, we can't do that. But we can give you less. So it's just a little trick there.
And for that, what we would say is, again, we're happy to answer questions about how much money you should ask for, because we have the benefit of looking at your application history and see how much you've received in the past. We also can see other organizations of your budget size and how much they've gotten, and it's all public information anyway, so we can tell you what are your odds and what the range should be for an organization your size. You definitely should give us a call if you're not sure what you should ask for. And
just one quick clarification, it is not based on your history. We want you to remember that. What you received in the past is not indicative of what you might receive in the future, but as Fabiana said, we have a sort of a metric of what's reasonable to ask for depending on your organization size. Another question we have is from someone who works at a historic house museum, and this person says, we don't create changing exhibitions, so how do I answer the question about my exhibition schedule? So if you're a house museum, what you might want to do here is to describe the period rooms, the furnished rooms in your house museum. You might want to think about, do you ever alter the spaces for special programs? Do you seasonally decorate the rooms? Do you tell other stories by adding objects or moving objects? Those represent changes in the exhibition space, and those are some things that you can discuss in that section. Ideally, a historic site is not static. It can be enlivened through programs. It can be enlivened through changes to the objects.
Another question that we get every once in a while is, if you apply for GOS in the museum program, can you also submit for project support also in the museum program? And the answer is no. The guidelines stipulate that very clearly. If you're applying, you can only apply for one. It's either GOS or program support within the museum program. So make up your mind, make a decision, and figure out which one it is. You can also call us to try to figure out, what's more important to you, to get GOS or to get any funding. So if you've never gotten any funding from NYSCA, definitely talk to us, and let's try to figure out together what may be your odds. And in the end, it's going to be your decision, but we can help inform it.
I think we have time for just one last question. Do you want me to take it, or do you want to do it, Fabiana?
I think you're so capable, Kristin. I think you should definitely take it. What do you guys think?
Someone wants to know, is the panel decision based solely on our application and our support materials? So yes, the majority of the discussion focuses on what you have submitted. Don't assume the panel knows something about you. You have to put it in writing. Don't assume, well, I know Kristin or Fabiana has visited my museum before, so they know all about me. We have to go by what you write. So make sure you detail what your institution is about and what you do in that application. The one thing that might be added for discussion is if there's information in the public domain. The Internet's an amazing thing. Fabiana and I get emails all the time. If you're in the middle of a GOS review and there's a major change, your executive director leaves, for example, we're probably going to find out about it. The panel will probably know it if it's in the public realm, and that can become part of the discussion. Always I encourage you, although you can't add to your narrative, in your supporting documents after the deadline, you should let us know if there is a major change. I do see actually one last question I think I can answer quickly. I'm a GOS applicant. Can I apply for the facilities grant? Yes, as long as you have been funded in fiscal year 16, 15, and 14, so all 3 consecutive past years. If you've been funded by NYSCA in the past 3 consecutive years, your museum might be eligible for the facilities program. Kristin Leahy will be doing a webinar on that, I believe, next week. The login, the information should be, she's done a huge e-blast, but it should also be on our website, so you may wish to participate with that. We want to, Fabiana?
So, again, just to, for those of you who joined a little bit later, the museum program is celebrating its 50th anniversary this year. If you guys have any ideas as to how we should celebrate it, please send us an email. There's something on our website.
Well, every month, on the last Monday of the month, there will be a post on Facebook highlighting some interesting little tidbit about the history of the program. So if you are friends with NYSCA on Facebook, have a look last month on Museum Monday, the last Monday of the month. We welcome you to use our hashtag Museum Monday or hashtag NYSCA Museum 50. To share that.
And tell us how you've been part of that 50-year history.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you for taking the time with us today. If you have further questions, you can see how to reach us. It's really critical that you spell our names right, or that email is going to go astray. So there's our contact information. A few quick notes. When the application goes live, which is likely around the 22nd of February, we will not be able to answer the same types of questions as we can answer now. If you have real content questions, if you're not sure what you want to come in for, you should reach out to one of us sooner rather than later. We encourage you to email us first so we can schedule a phone call and not play phone tag. We hope you've learned a lot, and these recordings will be made available later in case you missed anything, and I will send an e-blast out after our project support webinar occurs and after both are posted. So thank you again for joining us. Fabiana, any last words?
No, thank you. Gracias.
All right. Have a great day. Bye.